Hi guys, Hoovian Central here, and welcome back to another video. And today we're going to be looking at the in my opinion, top 10 worst classic Doctor Who episodes to coincide with the top 10. My other video a couple of days ago with the top 10 best Doctor Who episodes. And before I start the video, I want you to know that this is my opinion, and only my opinion. You might disagree with me, and if so, you can put that in the comments, what your ranking. And also, that I have not watched every classic episode, so therefore, that if there's some there's some that are well known to be very bad episodes which I haven't watched, like Underworld, and Underworld is the big one is one big one and that I haven't watched. So just keep that in mind, that if you see something that you think is really, really bad, and you know it's really, really bad, like Time Flight as well, then just note that I haven't watched every episode. But anyway, in 10th place we have The Unearthly Child, which is obviously the first ever Doctor Who story ever made. Now, I think this story will always be iconic for the first ever pilot episode. However, the actual rest of the story itself is pretty awful, and I think that it would have been a lot cooler if they just did the first ever episode, and then they just went straight into the Daleks. So you watch the first episode of The Unearthly Child, and then you just go straight into the Daleks as like a longer 8-parter. I think that might have worked a bit better, because ultimately it feels like there's a good episode, but the rest of it's just not. It's a bit fillery. It's not very good. And then in 9th place we have Destiny of the Daleks. Now, I think Destiny of the Daleks is an amazing Doctor Who story. Well, not amazing Doctor Who story. I think it's an amazing, lazily fun story to watch. If you just wanna watch something stupid. I think the fact that Davros isn't played by Michael Wisher in this one is a bit unfortunate, because I think David Gutterson's probably the worst person to ever play Davros. Not his acting skills are bad, the whole thing just didn't work very well. But I thought that the Doctor is very good in this, and so is Romana. And I think the Movellans are a very good kind of semi-villain thing, and I wish they'd be brought back in more episodes, rather than just kind of appearing in this and getting a slight tease at them being returned, possibly in the pilot episode in the New Who Series 10. But yeah, I think it's overall not that bad. I think I don't start hating the episodes until about 6th or 7th. So yeah, but this isn't it's not the worst episode in the world, but it just managed to make it into the list, a bit like Unearthly Child. And then in 8th place we have Carnival of Monsters. It's just, I don't know, it feels like they've kind of just thought, oh well, we've got some good Doctor Who episodes. We got some good stuff in Series 10, like Three Doctors, Frontier in Space, Planet of the Daleks, Green Death, all amazing stories. And then they just kind of thought, oh, we need another episode last minute, and that's Carnival of the Monsters. It feels like it's good writing. It's good writing. It's got a pretty good script, and I think some of the episodes are pretty good. Like the first episode is very good, but the others just seem so bland, and it feels kind of getting a bit. It feels a bit stupid, and the whole carnival theme doesn't really work, considering the Doctor complains how he tried to ban them on Gallifrey, and that's why it's illegal. But we've never heard of this happening before. He's never mentioned this before, so it feels a bit like of a random thing that doesn't make very much sense, in my opinion. And anyway, in 7th place we have The Invasion of Time. Now, on contrary to most people's opinion, I think Invasion of Time isn't as bad as people say it is. I think it's a decent story, but then when you look at it in terms of villain and companion and stuff, that's when it turns to being awful. Because I think the story's pretty solid as it is, but the Sontarans just don't need to be there. They feel pointless being there. It feels just like a waste of time, because they don't seem to be into much, and then when they finally do appear, they don't really do very much. They just kind of walk around the TARDIS. In the in the beginning, when he's trying to infiltrate Gallifrey at the beginning, the Doctor acts really unusual, and it's quite funny to watch the first time, but on rewatch it just looks it's just a bit annoying. And then if you've watched my top 10 best, you know that I really like Leela as a companion, and I think in this episode they really did it dirty, because they clearly just didn't put any effort into her exit, as the reason she left was because she found someone that she loved or something, but they barely even were on screen together for they were only on screen together for 2 seconds. It didn't make sense at all, but yeah, that's why I think it's here. But the story's okay. It's just some big issues, glaring issues, which can make it really quite an awful story. Then, in 5th place, we have Ghostlight, which is this is kind of where I kind of get a bit. They're not very good. I mean, Invasion Time it was pretty bad, but Ghostlight just doesn't make much sense. It feels a bit annoying because it's kind of like, I think Ghostlight kind of tries to be what Curse of Fenric does, where the Doctor takes Ace to this haunted house from her childhood. She's very scared of this haunted house from her childhood, and he makes her confront her fear of this kind of place. The whole plot with outside of that miniature plot doesn't really make sense, and it feels it just doesn't feel like it's right. It just doesn't feel like it's supposed to be there. It just kind of feels like, oh, here, we need to chuck something in, otherwise everything won't work. And I think the ultimate downfall of this is that it might have been able to get survival by itself, but the fact that in the next story, The Curse of Fenric, they managed to do this pretty much the same plot with Ace and the Doctor, but do it pretty well, with it really successfully. It just makes I don't like this one at all, especially how something like I complained about before with the Convent of Monsters, how they just throw you this thing about the Doctor not trying to ban this thing, and they've never told you about it. It's always been known that Ace hasn't really liked her mother because she left her, and Ace was taken by another family. So, because it's kind of even been established since her first introduction on Dragonfire. So that's why Curse of Fenric makes more sense than this one. So this kind of ends up feeling like a bit of a drag, and a pretty bit of a boring one to go through, and ultimately kind of brings down season 26's season 26's very good season all round, which is pretty upsetting. Then in 4th place, we have The Trial of the Time Lords, part 1 to 4, which I'm not going to go as much in because I did an in-depth review of it in my Trial of the Time Lords review. It's just, as I complained about in the thing, it felt like it didn't really work. It didn't really work at all. It felt like it was a bit like they were trying to go for some sort of post-apocalyptic world sort of thing, but it didn't really work. and it ended up making you feel like you were watching some just awfully budgeted movie, and it also felt like the villains just weren't convincing, and it didn't feel like they really needed to be there, because this woman here, who I can't remember the name of, she seemed like a pretty good villain, but the monster thing didn't really seem to work very well, and it wasn't like a good villain, and I think it would have been cooler if a more established villain, like it would have been cool if the Cybermen had returned and it was turned out to be them, or possibly the Master, although I'm not sure the Master would have fitted as much because of the fact they revealed him to be in the final part, the Ultimate Foe. But yeah, ultimately that means it's just not the best story, unfortunately. Now, rather ironically, keeping with the theme of season 23, is the Ultimate Foe, which my opinion on this is very clear. Robert Holmes made a perfect first part. It led into, and then it got brought, and then it got picked up by Pip and Jane Baker after he unfortunately passed away, and they just ruined it, completely and utterly ruined it. The Valeyard's character gets ruined. Perry's whole death scene gets retconned. The Master just doesn't really feel like he fits there after the so it just kind of feels pointless. So yeah. Now, in third place, in the top 3, is Leisure Hive. Now, if you haven't watched Leisure Hive, you really just try and leave it till end. Although I've kind of had 2 stories so far, both with Tom Baker and Romana in, I think Romana is still an amazing companion, and I think Lalla Ward plays her perfectly. I just think, unfortunately, the writing wasn't just as good as the companion would have been. I think if Romana was cast as Romana's character was created, and they cast Lalla Ward when it was in the earlier seasons, like season 14 or season 13, then it would have been amazing. But unfortunately we got them in season 18 and season 17, where it was kind of, the stories were inconsistent. You got really good ones like City of Death, and then you got some poor ones like The Leisure Hive. And ultimately, I think the story the downfall of the story just comes to a villain that just feels unconvincing as an actual threat, and it kind of feels sort of padded in some places. Then, in second place is my only story that I don't actually have on DVD, as I'd watched it on BritBox when I had the 30-day free trial, and that was The Time in the Rani. Now, The Time in the Rani is infamous for being probably not the worst, but one of the worst post-generation stories. Probably Twin Diamonds a bit worse, but I haven't seen that. So as it's supposed. So I think The Time in the Rani is probably, it just doesn't feel like it needed to be. It felt very it felt like they were trying to change it. It felt like they were going for the whole reason that Colin was fired was because of his darker tones. The whole fact that season 22 and season 23 were a lot darker, even though in my opinion season 20, it was kind of really season 21 where it started to get a lot darker, especially with stuff like Resurrection of the Daleks and Caves of Androzani. But that's what it's. But then in season 24, you can tell that to try and keep the show alive, they've really tried and kept it. They've really tried to keep it going with using quite a light-hearted Doctor, trying to make the Doctor quite happy and giddy, and the stories a bit more light-hearted. and I think it makes this story awful. And believe it, and surprisingly, believe it or not, it's another story from Pippa Jane Baker. So yeah, they haven't really got a good track record. I think as the Rani, Kate O'Mara does a very good job in Mark of the Rani, and I think she does a good performance in this. But I feel like it would have been better if her character was either as a one-off villain, bit like a one-off time villain, a one-off Time Lord that just kind of appears, was a villain, and then do it again, rather than having a decent episode with her in and then kind of ruining it. It felt a bit like a repeat of Omega, where he was in the first episode and it was pretty good, and the villain was played really well, and then they brought him back and the character was ruined a little bit. However, there's not much more to say about that. I think it's just a pretty poor attempt at trying to make Sylvester. It's a pretty poor attempt of them trying to make it more light-hearted. However, I think Sylvester McCoy plays a good role, is a good doctor in it. But yeah, and then in first place is my least favourite story that I've watched is The Silver Nemesis, which is the actual 25th anniversary story for Doctor Who, although a lot of people say, nah, it's not, that's Remembrance of the Daleks, because it actually does more callbacks to the original start of Doctor Who. It made sense to have the Cybermen in the story, as it's like the silver thing, like, because 25 years, it's like the silver jubilee or something thing. I'm not exactly sure what it's meant. I just know that the Cybermen made sense to come into it. However, it felt a bit lackluster, and I think it kind of fell short in the sense that so far in the 10th anniversary we had the Three Doctors, which is an amazing story, anniversary story. In the 20th anniversary they had the Five Doctors, but then in this it kind of felt like they fell short a little bit, as only really Sylvester stayed in it, which makes it pretty cool because it means it's kind of standalone, but it also makes it feel like lackluster when you realise that the only thing that they don't really seem to want to do very much with the story. The only thing they really do with the story is the Cybermen get introduced. There's nothing to do with anything about Doctor Who. There's no, unlike Remembrance. In Remembrance, there's references to Doctor Who. There's the fact that they go back to where it all began in the junkyard. There's even the whole scene of the TV where it says they're starting their British sci-fi programme. It's about to say Doctor Who, but then they cut away. But in this, it just feels like a run-of-the-mill story. And if this wasn't the 25th anniversary, I still think it would be on my top 10 worst list, because even at that, it's still probably the worst Cybermen story of the classic run, which is unfortunate. And I think ultimately it just becomes pretty lackluster in the story. Now, obviously, that's just my opinion. If you would like to rank your own top 10 worst stories, you can at the bottom. Obviously, I haven't watched every episode, so the main three that I was thinking of when I did it was Time Flight, Underworld, and Time Flight and Underworld are the two of them actually. Just and Twin Dilemma are the main three that I think if I watched them I would think they're probably quite bad. But I don't want to be a bit weird and put them on the list even though I haven't watched them, because then I wouldn't be giving an honest opinion. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you haven't watched any of my other videos, feel free to watch them. I think there should be 2 in the top right corner and then a subscribe thing here. if you if you haven't watched my top 10 best, then I advise you go do that, because it might make you more positive, and also it's there's a lot more praise in that story than there is in more praise in that episode than there is in this. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, and then stick around and watch more. Alright, goodbye.